So first of all, I'd like each of you to take 2 minutes here and introduce yourselves.
My name is Rick Wallace. I'm a candidate for Ithaca City Court judge. And the reason that I'm happy to be here is because GIAC is really part of my home. I'm not sure I need this. Yes, you do. Okay. So I spent my day today in Auburn cross-examining 2 police officers who were a team of 5 police officers, the entire police force of the city of Auburn during that shift. Because they had gone into the house of a biracial family and they had maced the father, the mother, the 18-year-old boy, the 15-year-old boy, the 15-year-old daughter, and the 11-year-old daughter. This is a case that nobody else wanted to take. It's a case that had to be done. Trust me when I tell you that that family did not need to be treated like that. I've been doing this kind of work for 24 years, defending cases involving racism, injustice, and civil rights for my entire career. 20 years with OAR, Offender Aid Restoration, helping to restore people in the Tompkins County Jail to their homes. Being deeply invested in issues of addiction and recovery at the state level, with the State Bar Association, and locally, and invested thoroughly in learning about and being a part of the evolution of treatment courts since they began in 1998. I possess a skill set that is unique to my candidacy, and I'm here tonight because I believe that it can really do tremendous good as a city court judge.
Good evening. I want to thank GIAC and the Multicultural Resource Center for putting this event together tonight, and I want to thank you all for coming out to hear what we have to say. My name is Christine Shaw, and I've lived here for the past 16 years. I have raised my children in this community. They went to the Ithaca City School Districts, and I've had a practice downtown for 12 years. I'm the only candidate who's actually been a participant, a member of the drug court team. For 3 years, I was on the drug court team in Ithaca City Court, representing the defendants. I have a plan for making that program more viable and keeping it as the valuable resource that it is for our community, a resource that helps to keep us safe and productive. I'm also the only candidate who has professional experience working with diverse populations. My undergraduate degree was in social work. I started working with people with disabilities about 20 years ago, working with unemployment issues. I've worked as a welfare advocate. I've worked for the Human Rights Commission downtown on discrimination issues. There I worked on issues of discrimination on the basis of race, gender, social status, sexual orientation, and disability as well. I'm also the only candidate that has spent years now representing youth in our community. I've been a law guardian and an attorney for children for years now. I'm also pleased that I was screened by the Independent Judicial Elections Qualifications Commission, and they determined that I'm qualified to hold the office of Ithaca City Court Judge. Part of the reason I'm seeking this office is because I'm concerned that with Judge Rossiter's retirement, there are no women sitting on any of the courts in Ithaca, in the city of Ithaca. That's Ithaca City Court, Town Court, and the higher level courts as well.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Seth Peacock. Most recently known as Judge Peacock. I was appointed to the Ithaca City Court to replace Judge Rossiter in early July, and I've been serving since then. Prior to that, I served on the school board as a volunteer board member for 10 years, and I was elected to my 4th term shortly before I was appointed as city court judge. I've been involved in this community in many ways, especially those related to young people. Prior to becoming a judge, I was also on the board of Family and Children's Services. I've been active in youth sports, coaching so many teams I cannot even mention. But what I want to stress tonight is that much of the work that both of these candidates have mentioned in their opening statements, I've already begun. I've already begun to take a look at our drug court. I've already visited other drug courts. I've already started a policy and procedure manual review because we need to start from scratch in a lot of ways and improve what we do in drug court. I've also mentioned many ideas in terms of reaching out to young people and building relationships. I've talked about youth court. I begin to implement that. I begin to talk to other courts who have very successful youth courts, even some are local in our area. I've talked about establishing an evening court program because it's not fair that people who can't get out of work during the day have to miss a whole day's pay and potentially get hit with a fine. I've talked about enhanced probation, establishing a probation mentorship program where not only are you assigned to your probation officer, but you're also assigned to a volunteer community member who will ask you and help you, guide you through some of the simple things that we all take for granted, but some people on probation have a hard time establishing, like a good work history, like family relationships. I've also started having young people come visit the court so that I can get to know them on a friendly basis, so that I know their names, so we don't have to have another press conference in the situation that we just had before this opening when officers didn't know the names of the kids, so we couldn't effectively deal with them in the proper way.
So our first question is, could you please tell us what makes you believe you are suited to be a judge?
Thank you. So, as I mentioned in my opening remarks briefly, having been a practicing attorney in Ithaca for 24 years, and I tell people this when I visit them, when I'm canvassing, it's not about the 24 years, it's not about the quantity of time, it's about the quality of time. There are some lawyers that I've met in this community and others that have 40 years, and I wouldn't want them to be my judge. During the 24 years that I've been practicing law, I have engaged in some very unique activities. Some of them you can see on my website, some of them you can't. My civil rights litigation history speaks for itself. My involvement in OAR for 20 years is one of the reasons that several different members of the community from several different constituencies came up to me and said, Rick, we think you really need to run for this job. I have a successful law practice, have for many years. This was not on my career path originally. But these people from the OAR community, from the treatment community, from the civil rights community, from the community of color, came up to me and said, Rick, the city court needs you. And I've agreed to do this, and I'm committed to do this, because I honestly believe that my time spent helping inmates in the Tompkins County Jail, my time spent helping people who are oppressed and whose rights have been violated, my time spent with people who don't have $100 for bail, who suffer from addiction disorders and are only committing nonviolent crimes because of their disease, not because they're bad people. People who are our neighbors and our neighbors' children who are coming back to be with us. These are the constituencies that came to me and said, Rick, we need you in city court because you possess a skill set that no other candidate could possibly apply for this job possesses. You know what? They talked me into it. That's why I'm doing that.
I mentioned a few things that I think make me an excellent candidate. I believe that I am a really good fit for Ithaca. I think that Ithaca is a compassionate, fair-minded community. By all means, we are not perfect. We have a problem. But I think that there is a strong core of people in the city of Ithaca that are committed to trying to make change. And I think I fit well into that community. As I mentioned, I spent 3 years working on the drug court team, working with the individuals on that team, and I know what's broken in that program. I've spent years working with youth, representing them in our courts, in custody, in neglect cases, on the JDs and PINs, and I've seen what resources are available, what's working, what's not working, and how they get from that system, unfortunately, sometimes up into the criminal or the adult criminal court system. And then I have that diverse experience of working with lots of different communities. And I've done that in a professional capacity. It's not just my interest, it's not just my passion, it's been my career. I spent 20 years focusing on fairness and equity for the people that I had the privilege to serve. If I get the opportunity to be the judge, those are the same values that I would use. I've worked on dignity, treating people with dignity, recognizing the humanity of every single individual that you deal with. And I've striven every single day in my personal life and my professional life to have that be at the forefront of what I'm doing on a daily basis. If I get the opportunity to be judged, I will continue to hold that at the forefront and have that be my focus. And as I mentioned also in my opening statements, I am concerned about the lack of diversity in our bench. And when you realize that your population isn't represented, there are no women currently representing 50% of this community, I think that it's your obligation to step up at that point in time. So here I am.
Thanks. The question that you asked used the word suited. And I want to ask us to aspire to something better than that in the city court here. The question is not simply, why are you suited? The question is, why do you excel? Why do we need you in this role? What do you bring that extra? We're all suited for it. We all have our law degrees. We've all practiced a sufficient number of years. The question really is, what have you demonstrated? What have you proven over your time in Ithaca? What have you shown in terms of your commitment to the community? How have you spent your time? And, I know we all have claimed that we spent the time, but I want you to really look at what I've done in terms of volunteering for 10 years on something that's not very fun. It's the school board. I loved it, and strangely enough, I actually miss it now. But if you look at that type of commitment, that type of long-term commitment to reaching out to people, to establishing relationships, to understanding, to having the compassion and the insight to make connections with other people from different parts of our community. Because as you know, the school district goes from Enfield to Caroline, covers downtown, Cayuga Heights. So you not only represent the people where you come from, your particular constituents, but you need to engage with everyone and represent all of the children and all of their interests. So I'll do that as a judge. I've already started. I've had young people come to the board. My commitment is to build relationships with these young people. So when I see them on the street before me, to be a role model to them, but also to hold them accountable if they should come before me. And you do that most effectively when you have a relationship.
What do you see as the injustices in the criminal justice system? What will you do to make the judicial system more fair and equitable?
Well, clearly, I think everyone's aware of the role that race and disproportionality plays in our judicial system, from law enforcement to incarceration rates. Even some of the laws that are written have been biased towards African Americans in particular. But I don't want to, since I'm African American, I don't want to only focus on how the laws have been unfair to my group. We also can say, how are the laws and how's our legal system affecting people in poverty? What about that group? The first hurdle of getting into the legal system is legal representation. Lawyers are expensive. Now in Tompkins County, we do a good job of providing high quality legal services to people who can't afford attorneys in criminal matters. But what about civil matters? There's almost nothing there except pro bono. So those two issues, and look, our nation has struggled with race historically, but those two issues both are racial issues with the legal system, but also how we treat people who are poor. And our system has not done a good job managing either of those. And as a judge, being keenly aware of those, I'll make sure that I apply the law fairly and try and deal with that bias from the bench, but also respect the law at the same time.
strikes me about the question is that it asks how we can improve the judicial system. And with most systems, what I've noticed in my 24 years of practicing law is that the fatal flaw in the system is not its construction. It's not its black letters of the words of the law or the choices of what canons or principles to apply. The fatal defect in most systems that I see is the simple fact that these systems are administered and run by us, by people, human beings with human frailties, human prejudices, ideas of what's right, ideas of what's wrong. And so the answer is to not restructure the system, in my view, so much as to educate people, to make people more tolerant, to give them cross-cultural exposure. I had the privilege of growing up in Ithaca, and I spent most of my passion was playing basketball. So I ran the streets, got to know a lot of people, tried not to get arrested, and succeeded in that regard, but had a lot of cross-cultural experiences that many people in the countryside, I noticed in Ithaca, never had the privilege of. And they didn't have the benefit of the education that I had and the desire to integrate and to see the goodness in people rather than their differences that I had the privilege of in my household growing up. So education, outreach, cross-cultural exposure, and for me, the single most important thing that will make the difference in any system is love and tolerance. Love and tolerance should be our code. Because without love and without tolerance, on the city court bench or anywhere else, it's not a system I've ever been employed with that's going to succeed.
It's an interesting question. How can we make the injustices in our court system more fair and equitable? And I respectfully disagree that sometimes the issues are systemic. It does have sometimes to do with the letter of the law. Some of the laws aren't fair the way that they're written. And participating in forums like this, making sure you vote, contact legislatures when there's a problem, participating in a forum that happened beforehand is a huge piece of that. I know personally that we all have that. We all bring our own prejudices to every interaction that we have. We live in a society that has bias and prejudice in every possible aspect of it. We can't pretend that it's not there. The important thing is to acknowledge that it exists. And what I do, and what I strive again to do in my personal life and in my professional life as an attorney, is to ask myself, am I treating the individual in front of me the same as I would if the black man was white, if the woman was a man, if the youth was an adult? Am I seeing something here that I shouldn't be seeing? Am I acting differently? And I ask myself that question on a daily basis. And unfortunately, sometimes those biases sneak up on you. And if you're not asking that question, you can't answer it, you can't address it. But as judge, I would ask myself that question every single day. Am I treating this individual fairly? Is this person getting the full protections of the law? And that doesn't go, it goes all around. I mean, we have to talk about, are the attorneys being treated with dignity and respect? Are the defendants being treated with dignity and respect? Is everybody being held to the same standard? And if a police officer comes into the courtroom and they're not being respectful, and they're not treating someone with dignity, well, then that behavior has to be addressed as well.
Based on these injustices you guys have pointed out, what plans do you have to deal with them?
Well, as I mentioned, as I started to tell you already, the plan would be to be introspective. But I also think that it's important to make sure that the systems that come before you as a judge, I want to back up for just a second. As judge, you have limited power. It's not universal. You can't do everything. And I'm not going to make any promises to anybody in this room that I can't do. And if I'm a judge, I'm going to uphold the law. and I'm going to enforce the law. And I'm going to do it with the fairness and equity and dignity and respect that every individual deserves. I'm not going to promise that I won't uphold the law. If someone comes in front of me and they have committed a crime and the proof is there and the evidence has sufficient quality, then, a conviction will result in, or I will hold up the policies and procedures of the court so that the jury can make that decision. So I'm not going to promise that I'm not going to uphold the law. I will. That's our responsibility. But I can promise you that I will act with integrity and with independence. I've never been sanctioned by any court. I've never been banned from a court. I've never been sued by a client. I've never been complained about by a client. Almost all my work that I've done in my legal history has been for people who cannot afford attorneys or for children. Something around 98% of the work that I've done for the past 12 years. I have no ties to business or special interest. I'm independent. And I would maintain that independence on the bench.
Well, sometimes it's helpful to actually talk about these big issues and bring them to specific things. If we tackle the big issue at a high level, often it's very difficult to get action. So I'm going to bring it down to a basic level. In the couple months since I've been judge, I've been thoroughly examining how we handle drug court. And one of the things that I've noticed is that our screening procedure is totally subjective. And it's those type of processes that allow for the biases that Christine mentioned to creep in. So what happens when we're screening is you meet, if you're a person wishing to enter drug court, you sit down and speak to someone. Typically the person you're speaking to is middle-aged, typically white, because you live in Ithaca. Now, if you're a young African-American male who doesn't deal with white women too much, you sit down, you don't have the proper chit-chat skills that makes the person feel comfortable. And what happens when that person writes the report, they say, oh, this person's not a good fit or may not make it. So one of the first things I'm establishing in drug court is an objective screening criteria. You have this list of crimes that make you eligible to come into treatment court. That's what we'll look at, and then we'll look at whether you meet the addiction. You have the addiction, you've committed one of these crimes, that's it. You come in and you toe the line like anyone else. The other thing that we can do that I've already started in drug court is how we look at our data. You will be surprised to know that we don't track our data in terms of race, sex, when they're in treatment court. You know what? Now, we're going to use the full program. There's a program provided by the state. We're going to use the full program, and we're going to fill in every box. But more importantly, we're going to report on that. So I'm going to be able to ask my drug court team, hey, how are we doing with mothers? How are we doing with young men? How are we doing with women over 40? And we'll have the data so that we can then actually reflect and see how we're doing with these particular groups. So I really want to bring it down to the particulars.
So this, the idea of bringing it down to particulars, I think, is also a very fruitful approach. 2 months ago, or earlier, on my website, I published a 4-point plan to revitalize the Ithaca City Treatment Court. The reason I did that is because none of the other candidates had a plan. And when the court started in 1998, I was there working at the state level and at the local level, helping lawyers and judges who were impaired by addiction with Judge Rowley, who was one of the founders of the drug court treatment programs here in Ithaca. I've followed the treatment court evolution since that time very, very carefully. When Judge Rowley left the city treatment court in 2001, there were approximately 70 cases. Last year, it hovered around 12. Treatment court is broken. I inquired why. I used my 24 years of experience studying this issue to come up with a detailed 4-point plan. So on my website, the plan shortly is this. They used to screen all the cases when they first came in for substance abuse, alcohol, drugs, free stop happening. Next, the lawyers, both prosecutors and defense lawyers alike, need education and outreach, the kind of education I was talking about earlier. Because if they don't have the information or the experience to see how the process of recovery from addiction can really transform lives, how are they going to sell it to their clients? How are they going to know as a prosecutor that this is how we make our communities safer? The third is accountability. As a judge, plea bargains can't happen without a judge's approval. I would hold prosecutors and defense lawyers alike accountable. If somebody's got a nonviolent addiction-related crime, they're not going to go to jail until we've talked about treatment. Treatment's got to be on the table first. Otherwise, we're going to end up with what they used to call frequent flyers. Same drug-addicted people coming back again and again with low-level crimes that ended when treatment court started in 1998. And last but not least, referrals from the outlying judges who I've known for 24 years. They respect me. They will refer cases if I go out to them individually and recommend that they do so.
Thank you. Next question. Why do you think a person of color or other disenfranchised person should vote?
I'm a white woman, and I'm a lesbian, and I know what it's like to be afraid. I know that Ithaca is not perfect. I've walked through the Wegmans parking lot and been accosted by college students, told that I could get fixed with a good, use your imagination. It's not safe sometimes, and I know what it means to not feel safe. And I think that the people of color in this community that have had any interactions with me know that I don't think that that's the issues of racism, of homophobia, of sexism are issues that can just be brushed under the table. I take them seriously. I focused my life's work on dealing with issues of discrimination, on working with individuals, I worked with people with disabilities on keeping employment, but I also worked with employers on educating them about the Americans with Disabilities Act. That was 20 years ago. And I've continued on that path ever since I finished my undergraduate studies about 20 years ago. I think that if you look at my record, if you talk to the people I've represented, if you talk to people in the community who know my work, you'll see that I do take these issues seriously, and that, as I said before, they're not going to disappear from my consciousness. These are issues that I feel in my own life, I have compassion for in other people's lives. I recognize the fact that there is systemic issues in our society, and that Ithaca is not immune to those issues.
Again, I've lived my life this way, as Christine mentioned, but I've already started at my time as judge. Simply, what I do is I bring people into the court. I let them know this is their house. You're not disenfranchised anymore. The first thing I do is start with young people. I've already had kids from day camp come visit the court, meet the judge, take a behind-the-scenes tour. I'm going to start that with my school district ties. I'm inviting every 5th grade to come to court, meet the judge. Let them know that this building is there. Let them know that this is a place where you will be given respect. Let them know that this judge, Judge Peacock, will respect you and see you as a human being. People know that about me. People know that about me as an attorney, and as a man, as a husband, as a father. But now they know it as a judge. When you walk into that building and you know the judge, and you had a positive experience with the judge, it's a different setting. You take ownership of it. You understand that I have rights in this system. And that judge, Judge Peacock, will support those rights. He'll enforce those rights. Because he's not part of this larger system that's out to get me. He knows me. He knows my family. He's served on the board. He's been at school functions. That's what you have to do. Open those doors and let people know that that house is theirs. And you don't just do it in court. You do it when you walk down the street. You do it when you hear kids screaming in the back. That's my son, by the way. I don't know if he doesn't like what I'm saying or does, but, so you do it in every way. You do it just making yourself approachable, but you have to respect the law. And by respecting the law, properly implemented, you respect the people. You let them know that that house, that building that you all paid for is theirs. And I'm starting at a young age getting kids in there.
What's real for me about the question of race and color and judgeship significance is that I feel really at home in this building. I feel really at home with a lot of the people in this building. Some of them I've known for many years. Went to school with them, with their family members. My best friends growing up in high school here in Ithaca were young men of color and remain my best friends to this day. One of them, my family over in the corner there, still calls Uncle Kevin, some of whom you know. There's no doubt in my mind that when it comes to issues of equity in the judicial system, what really matters is cross-cultural exposure and awareness of not so much what it's like to be a person of color, because I could never know that. I'm a person of white privilege who grew up on Trip Hammer Road. Frankly, when I started this race, I said to myself, 25 years I've spent establishing great connections in Ithaca with the community of color. In fact, my whole life. With the gay and lesbian community. My whole life. And of course, look at my two, opponents. As luck would have it. The bottom line is this. If love and tolerance really is our code, if the court is staffed by anybody who is committed to issues of caring about their brothers and sisters, no matter what their race, no matter what their gender, no matter what their sexual orientation, the chance that justice will be done is greatly enhanced. Anytime you have someone on the bench who lacks that commitment, or God forbid, lacks the awareness of their own racism, of their own prejudices, of their own intolerance, then there's going to be trouble.
Thank you very much. Next question. In addition to participating as assigned counsel, what other things have you done in your career to address structural inequities in the judicial system?
The single biggest solution that I've been able to, and I'm somewhat cynical about this, I'll admit, the single biggest solution that I've been able to promote in my 24 years as a practicing attorney in the criminal justice system, in the civil justice system, in the justice system as a whole, and sorry to get a little crude about this, but it's to sue the bastards. Sometimes people behave very, very badly. I started out with my introduction explaining how I was examining officers just this morning in Auburn, who had pepper sprayed an entire biracial family, including a 15-year-old girl and an 11-year-old girl. Nobody else wanted to take that case. I was privileged to take that case. And you know why? I take cases like that in Ithaca too when nobody else wants to take it. Because if nobody takes those cases, then nothing changes. Now, on the one hand, what you win if you win that lawsuit is money. Money alone is not going to make better the kinds of things that happened to the two young men that we had to form about at 5 o'clock tonight. It's not going to restore their innocence. But I have to tell you, and again, here's my cynicism, the closest thing to changing the behavior of the bad actors in this world that I know of is a good old-fashioned lawsuit. Because they are taken to task, they're put under oath, the victims get their day in court, there's cross-examination, and there are oftentimes employment consequences for people in government positions and in positions of authority who behave in ways that are just inappropriate, and on occasion downright unfathomable. Who in the right mind would knowingly mace a 15-year-old and an 11-year-old girl? Who would hold at gunpoint 6-year-old boys that are trying to get home to their grandmother's house after playing basketball. These matters need to be addressed. I've spent my career addressing them. That's the best solution I know.
Like Rick, I'm a strong believer in suing people, and I've done my fair share of people, civil rights actions against our fair city, some may recall. And but again, I'm going to talk about it a little different way. The question was dealing with the judicial system, and as a lawyer who sues people, that's one way, and that's what you can do. I don't know at the end of the day when someone cuts a check whether I've affected the judicial system or I've just been kind of a pawn in the whole game of the lawsuit insurance world. But I will tell you just from a personal standpoint, my experience as an African American attorney before I became judge, I was the only one in the whole building. In fact, my experience in upstate New York, I've never walked into a courtroom and seen a person that looked like me in a suit acting as an attorney. I've seen plenty of people in orange, but I've never had the experience where I'm fighting against another African American attorney, male, female, anything. And I'll tell you, when it hits me is when I go, people are used to me in Ithaca now, when I walk through security, but when I go to the surrounding towns and counties, if I have an outside case, I walk in and they give attorneys a little ID card. And it's always shocking when I flash my attorney ID card, and there's this moment of hesitation where the court officers, who are respectful and they're not going to say anything bad, they're like, who the hell are you and why are you showing me this card? And that experience is even multiplied more because since I've become judge, they've now given me a different color card. And you should see the reaction when I walk into an outside court and show that card. So just my presence, I've tried to be present in the system as an African American, and I don't know what else to do, but I've tried to just be present.
I'm going to take a little bit of issue with the question, what have you done to address inequities other than work as assigned counsel? And I've spent a lot of time being assigned counsel. I've also worked as a law guardian, and I think that children deserve representation. One of the issues, I've never been afraid to take on the really hard and unpopular cases. I've been in the news, I've taken on the police department in the role of assigned counsel, making assigned counsel rates, and I've done that willingly and with everything that I have. I've striven in every case that I've ever had to represent individuals as assigned counsel no differently than how you would represent anyone else. You owe every single client zealous advocacy, your very best every single day. I would bring that same commitment to being a judge. But I think the other piece of that is you need to hold other attorneys accountable. If the assigned counsel program has an attorney that's not making the grade, the judge needs to say, this isn't good enough. We have to make sure that people who are getting assigned attorneys are getting excellent representation from the beginning to the end of their case. They're getting attention, they're getting commitment, they're getting quality. I think that's all I have for that one.
Thank you. Last question here. Have you read Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow? Please share your reflections. What does the new Jim Crow have to do with your job?
So some of you may know that I have dyslexia, and I actually don't read for pleasure. I read as part of my job, so I haven't read the book. But what I do to make up for that is I'm aware of the book. And how I learned about the book was I watch fanatically a channel called C-SPAN. And it's always playing in my house when I'm around. I just like listening, and I oftentimes they interview authors about their books. There's a program called Book Notes that I watch all the time. Unfortunately, I don't read the books because it gives me a headache. But yeah, I'm familiar with the book, and much of what's in the book is pretty obvious if you spend time even here in Tompkins County, particularly in New York State. Many of you don't know that we have a system in our New York State prison system that actually runs as a corporation and produces products. And as a school board member, we were, I guess the word is mandated to buy those products when they were on state bid, and we had several discussions about that. So the issues of race are real. I'm not saying anything surprising to this audience, and the book identifies many of those.
I am familiar with the book. It's been a busy summer and I have not read it. I have to say that I really wish that the panel, the organizations that put this together had given us some warning that there was going to be a question about a specific piece of literature that we could have reviewed and had a moment to take a look at and prepared an answer. I don't know what else to say to the question. I wish that we had had an adequate response, an adequate warning that the question was going to be asked.
Well, unlike the other two candidates, I just finished my second reading of this book.
All right, that's what I'm talking about.
Thank you, Phoebe. I'd love to tell you it's the truth, but it's not. So, what I have had are some detailed and interesting discussions about the new Jim Crow. And some while canvassing. When I talk about OAR, my 20 years working with inmates in the Tompkins County Jail, the book seems to come up. And one of the main themes of the book is about what people call the prison industrial complex. Not just making manufacturing goods, which I've seen. I have a lawsuit, just settled a lawsuit against Auburn Penitentiary for the way they mistreated Native American visitors during a Native American religious ceremony, causing one of the Native American visitors to be injured on her way out because they had no regard for her well-being. Just finished settling that case and got to go into Auburn prison and see what it looks like inside. I was in another prison earlier on in my career for a local young man named Freddie, who they didn't give goggles to when he was drilling hardened prison steel with a very soft drill bit, and the drill bit popped in his eye. He was blinded in one eye. And he's a member of this downtown community with a well-known local family. And a case on behalf of a Groton elementary school principal about 4 or 5 years ago, in which we were joined by the New York City Civil Liberties Union and Lambda, the gay rights advocacy group, to prevent certain kinds of stop and frisk busts that were happening in Manhattan using a loitering statute that had been ruled unconstitutional 17 years prior to the time that my client was arrested in Stewart Park for loitering in a place known where gay men congregated. The officer either knew or should have known that was no longer the law. They arrested him anyway because he was a gay man, publicized it, and his career as an elementary school principal was ruined. That case had to go to federal court for justice to be obtained. So once again, my view is that the prison industrial complex is real. The number of African Americans in prison being disproportionately high off the charts is real. And talking about it and writing books about it is good, but unless there are people that have the authority to commence lawsuits and actually do something, like Lambda, like the New York City Civil Liberties Union, and like me, nothing change.
At this point, we'll open it up to the audience for a couple questions.
So my question is really about those folks who are, I appreciate, Seth, that you brought up the question of class, which seems to be an issue that hasn't gotten a lot of attention yet so far this evening. But I'm thinking about the working poor, the people who are just over the boundary of income for assigned counsel, and yet still can't afford legal representation, because they're busy paying their rent and their mortgages and buying their kids' school supplies. That would be in the courthouse. And what, as the city judge, are you going to be able to do for those people who actually aren't eligible for assigned counsel but still can't afford to get good representation in our city court system?
That's a huge problem, and in my 2 months on the job so far, the one concrete thing that I discovered that I hope to implement is to simply bring an evening court. One of the problems is that we run court from 8:30 to 3:45, and it's over. And if you work during the day, your choice is to have a warrant issued for you for failing to appear, or lose a day's pay or lose some hours. So in terms of something we could do to represent and help the working poor engage with the system is simply say, you know what, once a month, we'll open the court in the evening. I'm on call 24 hours, so it doesn't matter to me. We'll have to work with the clerks and the court security. But simply open the court for a simple traffic matter. Come in the evening. You don't have to miss a day's work. We'll do it once a month. It may cost a couple of hours in overtime, but it's a way of again, making that building belong to the people and providing better customer service, frankly. And that's what I'm about as judge, and that's what I'll commit to continue to look at ways to provide better service to the citizens of Italy.
I think that the idea of evening court is a great idea. Frankly, it's not going to happen. We are laying off people in our court system left and right. There are hiring freezes, people have lost jobs. You can't get an extra 15 minutes of court time for jury deliberations on a major felony. The Office of Court Administration, who is a state agency that deals with funding that sort of thing, is simply not going to do it. It's not going to happen. It's a great idea, maybe in a more economically affluent time it might happen, but we're not going to get that. The judge doesn't have control over it. What I would do is there is an appeal process for the assigned counsel program, and there are people that just nudge over the barrier. They're just a little bit too much income. And if those people are advised, and they need to be advised, that there is an appeal process. And you can't just look at income, because one of the issues that the assigned counsel program does is looks at family size and income. And I think that the assigned counsel program does a good job to the extent that they do. But I would look at the appeal process as a means of getting those people that really need representation, but do not meet the guidelines in a strict fashion. And if their legitimate expenses and their family size and all of that comes together to a place where this person requires some assistance in this, and the matters of sufficient gravity that just being available for an individual who's appearing in front of you pro se is enough, they really need legal counsel, then I would use that appeal process to get people attorneys.
So my experience on a systemic level is the same as Christine's. I try a lot of cases, and it's very clear to anyone who tries a lot of cases that the judges have absolutely no control over how late the courthouse stays open or on what days it's open. In reality, the security guards control the hours of the courtroom. That may seem silly, but it's what's real. Judges in cases that I've been a part of have asked for an extra half an hour to keep a jury deliberating or to finish an important witness. And if the security guards don't approve it, they have to ask the chief judge. And if the chief judge doesn't approve the overtime, it's not going to happen. And the rule is the chief judges are not supposed to approve any overtime. So night court is probably not a fiscal reality given the current status of our court system. The other remedies for this problem are twofold, in my view. First, there is some activity at the state bar level about access to justice, requiring pro bono legal services of all new attorneys a certain number of hours per year. In my view, mandatory pro bono is long overdue. There are those of us who do pro bono legal services because we believe it's the right thing, but many more would be doing it if it became law. There is now a proposal in front of the New York State Bar Association to promote mandatory pro bono, and that would help the problem tremendously. The second thing on the local level is with respect to Tompkins County and its assigned counsel program. The Constitution of the United States of America and the Supreme Court decision in Aiken versus Oklahoma and other cases mandate that a person who may go to jail and can't afford a lawyer gets representation. My view is that some of these economic cutoffs for assigned counsel are arbitrary, that it depends on the circumstances of the person. The judge gets the final say. If someone in my court really needs a lawyer, can't afford it, chances are they're going to get a lawyer.
Thank you, Vinny. My name is Jabron Hagley, and I'm a native Ithacan that I returned a couple of years ago. And there's a couple of questions I wanted to ask. Before I ask the questions, I just wanted to make the point to Judge Peacock. I really did like your suggestion as far as that drug court process. When you go in for drugs, a lot of times the clerks are from Enfield, Newfield. A lot of the people that are going in the process are from the city. So there definitely is that mismatch of conversation. And a lot of times they'll just write on, like you said, on that report because they don't really understand our community or our bringing up, or sometimes how we speak. They find it rude or find it just very offensive, and just that's how they are. So I definitely agree with that. I think that definitely needs to be addressed. But the question I wanted to ask is, what is your feelings about as far as, I wrote it down here, excuse me 1 second. Police, the problem with police relations with African American community. Because I've noticed, I live up in South Hill, and I noticed that the students are allowed to run up and down Hudson Street, Aurora Street. There's no police action at all. But I know if that was to happen down there, let's say on the south side, it's a totally different story. Probably be SWAT cars down there and everything else. So I'm not sure how much a city judge authority, how much authority you have as far as the police and them and their reaction with the African American community or any community at all. But I'm wondering, what is your thoughts on that, and what do you think the number one problem is, specifically with police relationship with the Black African American community? Because once again, I see kids from students, I see particularly, are allowed to run up and down the commons in South Hill and, basically litter the city. They throw cans, beer cans, and they, but I know that would not be the same if it was in a different demographic of the city. So my question is, what do you think the number one problem is? And the second question was, do you have any authority actually to ask the police when they bring the report? The same thing you were saying with the chit chat thing, when they go in for drug court, the police report is the first thing the judge sees, is what that cop wrote, what happened that night. And a lot of times that's not the accurate report. That's not what happened at all. They put their little twist on it, to say the least. So I'm not sure if the city judge really can question a police report. So I know that's pretty much done by the chief of police, or might be Mayor Savanti's position to take a little more action on that. But I do notice that I have seen the difference in that.
Mr. Hickman, I think that your question is good. I actually support some of the mayor's plan to try to improve the relations, but I think that the main issue is compassion, that there's an issue of us and them, and identification, and I think that those are huge issues, and I'm not sure how much the judge can do about that, except for question what comes before them from the standpoint of what is, is this an us and them kind of situation? Is that what I'm looking at? Does this report look like it makes sense? Sometimes things come in and just don't make any sense. We have in our court system, the initial interaction with an individual is often at an arraignment after they're arrested and they're brought in, and we have to, as a community, and especially as a judge or anyone who's interacting with the court system, again, ask ourselves, does this look fair? Is this a respectful interaction? And I think that some of the things that we can do, not necessarily from the court's perspective, but from the policing perspective, I fully support 100% the idea of cameras. Let's take some of that SWAT material, send it back, and let's get some cameras. Because cameras eliminate a lot of the he said, she said, he said, he said kind of issues that we have. And I'd really like to see that. I'd like to see it as a defense attorney, and I'd love to see it as a judge. And I think that the justice system sometimes acts a little bit like a train. At the very beginning of that process, it's rushing forward, and you're just trying so hard to get out of the way. I always say that at the moment that you walk into a courtroom with the jury is the moment when you're innocent until proven guilty actually comes into place. It sure doesn't feel like that beforehand. And I'm just cognizant of that, and I keep it in my mind if I have the privilege of being judge.
So when I look back on my last 24 years as a lawyer here in Ithaca, my whole life really, having been born and raised here, but really with a bird's eye view as a lawyer practicing criminal defense here in the city of Ithaca, and having occasion to really pay attention to what happens with police-community relations. I remember a time, we're probably talking 15 or 20 years ago, my colleagues were still in school, and there was an officer that many of you may remember. Her name was Officer Kathy. I won't give her last name because she ended up being the subject of some very vicious racism at the hands of her colleagues in the police department as a consequence of being the single mother of two biracial boys. Officer Kathy was such a dedicated officer that she was placed on what was then the community policing unit. South side, the north side. She knew the families. She knew the people. She actually, on her own initiative, started out something called the West End Breakfast Club. Those of you that are community members who are older will remember Officer Kathy and the West End Breakfast Club. When I was at the forum at AME Zion Church a week or so ago, and one of the moms of one of the young men who was stopped on August 9th spoke. She didn't speak about racism. She didn't speak about white versus black. She asked a very poignant question. She said, where are the Ithaca police at the GIAC basketball tournament? 15 years ago, Officer so-and-so used to be there every time. And Officer so-and-so knew my kids. Officer Kathy was one of those officers. She was in their doorway, getting to know the people, getting to know their children, and had enhanced community police relations to the extent that no other approach is going to create. Cameras are a solution to the symptom, but they're not going to cure the problem.
Again, the solution's about relationships. As Rick said, that our particular recent situation, if the officer knew the kid, it would have been, hey, whatever his name was, and that would have diffused it. That's effective policing. What can a judge do? A judge, well, first of all, being a police officer is an extremely difficult job. You deal with some of the most unpleasant things that we all take for granted. Not many people in this room have tackled people, been spit on, had to go into difficult situations where people may have been suicidal. So officers deal with extremely difficult and hard situations. Now, the check on that, and we give them this tremendous amount of authority to use physical force against us. The check on that is the judicial system. The check on that is judges who are not afraid to uphold the Constitution when an officer does something wrong. A judge who can stand alone, withstand all the political pressures from both sides, the police and the community, to make the right call and follow the law. I've demonstrated, as my time as an attorney and as a board member, that I can stand alone. I can make a difficult call. I can follow the Constitution. I've done that throughout. So many times when I was on the board, there were 8-1 votes, and I was the one. And as judge, and I've been there a couple months now, you have to make these tough calls, and you're very isolated. But you have to have the strength of character to stand up and have the independence to review the law, follow it as best you can, and make those tough calls. And oftentimes those tough calls enforce the protections that you were talking about. Because the officers need to know, this is the line, if I cross it, there'll be no case. And in fact, I could get in trouble for that.
My question for you guys is, we represent the Latino in this community. I have 19 years in this town. This one is kind of my home. Well, right now, we have a small center in the Commons next to the Worker Center. We, No More Tears and Cultura, is doing a service right now to ask the people in the community how the interpreters can be in places to, like the hospital, city court, and make places that need to be more information for us, specifically city court. Because there's a lot of complaints about in OIR on volunteers, and sometimes they call us to see how they you guys the solution when somebody comes and say, I can't understand what you guys say. How long they have to take to me to respond up here? Or if I have to go through the church, what's the solution? Because I don't understand what you guys say to me. Or maybe I'm doing a robbery, or maybe I'm using drugs. What's my solution to explaining in Spanish to them to understand what's the, I got all the details in this stuff, but it's kind of hard to explain it. And like me, right now, I'm trying to explain, get some questions for you guys. You have to have interpreters in the city hall to people, the Latinos, to understand what their situation is going to be forward. Are you guys willing to do that, or it's going to take, because the Latino cannot take 5-year or 10-year thing. We need to do it now. When you guys are running for your candidate, the Latino is going to be right there and say, what's our solution to you and to us? Because we really to support you guys, but what's our result for us? That's my question to you guys.
I think it's a really good question, and it's an important issue. One of the things that occurs to me is that we need to do a better job of identifying people who do need translators much earlier on in the process. If the police have had interaction with someone and they're being brought into court and they've noticed that there's a language issue, that should be brought to the court's attention immediately so that you can make sure that you schedule and arrange for interpreters immediately. And I studied Spanish. You know, I studied Spanish for years in college. And I even went to Mexico and did an immersion program. I lived in Mexico for 6 weeks and didn't speak anything but Spanish. And I barely can get through a conversation. I mean, I can't get through a conversation. I can barely get a sentence out. I think we just need to have a lot of respect for the fact that the people coming into our community that are from non-English speaking cultures have come so far in their understanding of our language. I mean, my interactions with my clients that I've had in the past that are primarily Spanish speaking, their comprehension of the English language is admirable. Oftentimes, they haven't had any formal education in it, and if they have, it's been far less than I ever got in Spanish, and yet their English surpasses mine, and it's the immersion in the culture. So I think we have to have some respect for that effort and to hold that in our minds when we're dealing with this issue. I just think that probably the most important thing is identifying a need, whether it be a need for an interpreter, whether it be a need for a person with a disability from an understanding standpoint, whether it be a need for access for an individual, that those needs need to be brought to the court's attention as early as possible in the process.
In Ithaca, we're fortunate in that we have people from all over the world speaking many different languages. I can't tell you that we'll have a ready interpreter for all of those languages. What I can say as judge is that not only will I be open to, as Christine said, waiting for it to be raised, but I'll actively check myself to make sure that there is an understanding. If not, then there you have to adjourn the matter and contact the appropriate agency and get an interpreter, because you cannot engage with the legal system if you don't have the language skill to deal with many of the complex issues that are before the court.
The system clearly has in place its own protocol for language barriers. The Office of Court Administration has, hired interpreters to come to court to help people with language barriers understand the proceedings. For me, that really doesn't address the full issue. My sense of the dynamic that you're talking about over the 24 years that I've been observing these kinds of things happen is that it's really it's something deeper. It's actually a matter of access. Access to justice. If you can't understand the language that the court proceeding is being conducted in, you have no access. But it's more than just that. So suppose someone comes to court, they don't really understand the language, the court system gets them a translator, and I can tell you that they're not always the best. It could be a slightly different dialect, they'll do the best they can, but it's not great. You've enhanced that person's access to justice. But it's not really the same access to the same, frankly, white privileged constituency that built this court system has to the same justice. And it's supposed to be. Our Constitution says it's supposed to be. So how do we solve that problem? Well, the best solution that I know is kind of what Phoebe was talking about. Get a group together that can help people when it comes to issues of access to justice. If there's a group that can help explain to people that don't really understand the court system, kind of what their experience is. They may not be lawyers, but they have experience. Well, here's my experience. And they share their experience with that other person that needs help. That person can be helped. And even perhaps found a translator or someone that speaks the same language even better than the court translator. So that, again, a grassroots community-based solution, in my view, is probably the most likely to provide real, meaningful access to justice.
Thank you once again to our candidates. We can have a round of applause for them. Thank you guys for coming out and have a good evening.